Office hours. This is what is it? It's Friday, December 13th already. Holy crap. We're almost through the end of the year. But it's always good to be back with all of you for office hours. And let me get the screen share set up. Today, what we're discussing is security from a regulatory perspective. I'm not sure how much you are all aware, but in the last couple of years, and I'm going to do a brief run through of this, there have been significant security legislations dropped around IoT security in major geographies like the whole US, the whole EU, the UK, and that's what we're going to be going through today and how that potentially impacts development. And then next week, we're going to be looking into how that impacts us on the business side. Now, I kind of have a feeling that it's going to be difficult to separate the two of them, but we'll do our best. Amesh, you were just talking about that, and I think that might be a good way to set the stage a little bit for our conversations today. Was that you were thinking about some of these things and getting a little scared because you're an IoT OEM, right? What are some of the things that you're concerned about when it comes to creating IoT products, connected devices, and the cybersecurity ramifications? Like, what concerns you about that?
I think the one for sure we have to spend more time on planning the product. Planning phase will be longer. The ROI will go in suspense mode because you quite not know, because usually the development time will get extended as you're not sure. And if the regulations keep changing, that's again one thing. It's not like it's done and it's over. Like we have seen 2018 was the first version, and then there were another revision came later after I guess 2021 or something. So I think the more and more barriers, I mean, as a small company, I would say it will be more to look all the time what's going on there, more like a taxes regulation. I compare this with the tax regulations.
Yep, no, for sure. Well, it's probably worthwhile getting our introductions in order. So my name is Brandon Lewis. I've been a technology journalist for about 15 years and set off to start a developer community, and this is where we're at. So I'm really happy to be here and happy that all of you guys are able to join us at least for a little bit of time each week. Ming, do you want to go next?
Well, I just catch my breath back. Hi, so I'm Ming. I've been hanging around as a Unix and Linux consultant for over 30 years and have spent the past 15 years focused just on the embedded world as both a software and general systems developer.
Great. Welcome again. Amesh, probably should have had you introduce yourself before you just started talking for those of you who don't know the gang.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Umesh Lokhande from Pune, India, and I've been building embedded software and hardware for past 10 years for IoT solutions. Thank you.
Great. Hey, Marvin, you want to say hi?
Hi, guys. I'm Marvin. An embedded Linux developer for a bit over 3 years now, and glad to be here.
Great. We're going to skip 2 and 3 today because we have a special guest who's going to help us navigate some of these IoT security issues, specifically when it comes to regulation. So today, what we're going to be getting into, as I preluded a little bit, is IoT security from a regulatory perspective. And the person that we have on with us is Chris Melville, who's a principal security engineer in the UK government, HMG, as the people across the pond refer to it. How you doing, Chris? Welcome.
Doing good, thank you. How are you guys?
Doing great. So I've got this slide with some overview of the different legislation that's been passed, like major legislation, and I'm going to run through this really quickly. But I'm not sure, before I dive into this, how well versed are you, Chris, in either the EU or what's been happening in the UK? Like where are you focused?
So my primary focus is the UK side of things. So we, obviously since Brexit, we've exited from the EU, and we've separated our legislation out. We do still have close ties with the EU when it comes to regulatory matters. So I think the PSTI, once you're going to get detailed, it's a European standard we're using for that one. So there's a lot of crossover here and there. US is probably the one I'm least versed in. That's quite different in that one. It's still NIST standards. I'm still familiar with the NIST standard, but it's an IoT specific one for that one.
Yep. Well, good to contextualize and make sure that when we ask questions that we're aiming them in the right direction. But like I was saying, so here are a few really big ones, and these are obviously focused on more Western geographies. At this point, these are bigger markets where a lot of connected devices are being sold into. Would not be surprised if there are other, this is not an exhaustive list. I would not be surprised if there are other regulations in other geos. And I certainly think that this is probably just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to cybersecurity regulation around the world related to IoT devices. Do a quick run through of these. The EU Cybersecurity Act 2019 standardizes ICT products security for certifications for ICT products and enhances cross-border cooperation, but obviously between the different EU companies. There's a European cybersecurity certification framework. There's somebody in the audience right now who's a friend of mine who, Florian, if you're able to step on stage real quick, it'd be good to get your take on European cybersecurity framework and what that means if you're so brave. But essentially, one of the scary things about this is, as Amesh was pointing out, if you're a small company and you don't comply with the regulation, you could be shut out of the Eurozone, right? You could be shut out of selling products into there. And so this framework sort of guides what you would need, what you would need to do to be compliant. In the US, Cybersecurity Improvement Act, this has been around since 2020. As Chris mentioned, NIST standards for securing IoT devices are in play here. Some of it is around remote patching, and secure passwords, but they're pretty focused on connected devices that are being used or sold into the federal government. Of course, that could be just the beginning. The federal government buys a whole lot of connected devices here in the U.S., as I'm sure you can imagine. So you could easily see this rolling out into the broader industry, and it's already a pretty large group of suppliers there anyway. And then in the UK, and I'll do my quick run through and then let Chris talk about what this means from his perspective. So the UK Product Security and Telecommunication Infrastructure Regime. So there are new security requirements that strengthen regulatory oversight from a couple of different agencies there, and create more robust security approaches by requiring companies to secure supply chains, which is very important, restricting or banning certain vendors in different sectors, specifically telecom, and then requiring things like default passwords, easy updates and patches, secure device access and maintenance over time. We'll dive into a little bit of what those things mean, actually. Really quickly, now that Florian's here, I want to give him a chance to give a little bit more of an explanation of what the EU Cybersecurity Act is before we jump into you, Chris, because he can explain it a lot more eloquently than I.
Yeah, so hi everyone. So my name is Florian. I'm with Concatec. I'm a product manager there. So yeah, it's a quite important thing for us because the Cybersecurity Act, so especially the Cyber Resilience Act, actually. So the Cybersecurity Act is a much broader framework within the European Union, which gave ENISA a lot more, like handling space and a lot more, operating possibilities. So ENISA is the European Cybersecurity Institution, but Cyber Resilience Act, which was adopted this year. So this one is quite important to us because the Cyber Resilience Act, it's it's an act which is now for all products with digital elements, and it's a very, very wide definition. So actually what they say again is it's a act which is for all products with digital elements with digital, physical, or logical connections. So it means not only hardware, but also software. And it regulates how the life cycle should be handled of all those products. And there are a lot of new applications for manufacturers. So yeah, some of those applications were already good practice. So you already had to do it in the past, but it was not regulated. But there are also a lot of things which are now regulated and you have to do. For example, you're now obligated to report any known vulnerabilities or actively exploited vulnerabilities to your products to ENISA, and you only have 24 hours time to do so. But this is something which you still have time to transition to, because it was adopted this year, the Cyber Resilience Act, and you have 24 months to implement any processes you need to do the reporting. And after 36 months, so in 2027, it will be fully enforceable, the Cyber Resilience Act. And the really important thing about it is to bring any product onto the European market, you need a CE marking. And to get the CE marking, you need to comply fully to the Cyber Resilience Act. So it's really important for the future to get any new product onto the EU market to adhere to all the regulations there. It's a really up-to-date topic, even if it's 3 years away. But if you start any development project now or in the near future, probably you will be very close to 2027 when you will bring your product onto the market, and then you really need to adhere to all the regulations here.
Thanks for the rundown, Florian. Chris, so that was a look at the EU Cyber Resiliency Act. How does what's happening in the UK compare? You know, are these apples to apples? Are they apples to oranges? Are they apples to cows? Like,
I mean, they're very similar. The core principles are very similar themselves. I mean, I don't believe we've got the 24-hour reporting for actively exploited vulnerabilities, but a lot of it is going to be very similar. And even with the US one, the core goal is for a secure infrastructure, a secure ecosystem across the public, essentially. And that's going to be the same across all of them. It's just going to be little niches here and there that are going to be different in each region, but with the core principles, and as long as those are followed, you're going to be very close in almost all of them. And then it's just getting those little niches ironed out when it comes to actually rolling out to the market.
Yeah. So before we go much further, I wanted to, I put together some questions. I wanted everybody to have an opportunity to make this sort of an open discussion and share, because we are from different geographies, and, what our experiences and what our thoughts and concerns and fears are around this, right? Because it's going to impact all of us in one way or another. But before we do that, Chris, what's your, who are you? Like, you work, like, why does the government need a security engineer anyway? Right. Like, so can you tell us a little bit about, where you came from, how you got into this gig, and, what you do today?
Yeah, sure thing. So I've got a master's degree in computer science and information security from Royal Holloway. I've been in HMG for a long time. I've been associated with them for a very long time. I came up through the Cyber First scheme, which is an NCSC-led program that is to get people into the cybersecurity industry from a very early age. So I've been involved in government, I believe, since about 2016, but I've been working for them officially since 2020. Essentially, what I do as a principal engineer is ensure that the department I work for's infrastructure is secure. And that is sending logs to our SIEM solution, our security incident event management system, and just making sure that we have an infrastructure that can go on and give those alerts and give those logs. So detecting vulnerabilities, being able to see if there's been any bad actors accessing infrastructure that they shouldn't be accessing. For the department I work for, we've got 36 public-facing services that we manage that are fairly significant, some of which are, if they go down, Prime Minister will get a phone call within 10 minutes of it going down. So we are constantly up and running, and we are constantly having to keep everything up to date. And we're one of the few departments as well that is cloud only. We have no on-prem. So we are having to constantly adapt to new things that are coming out, and even with regulation as well, we have to constantly make sure we're up to date on the regulation side and keeping up to date with compliance. And I'll mention it, no doubt, in the next few slides, but secure by design. Make sure all our services are secure by design.
Yeah, and I think ever since the IoT became a big thing, you've been hearing terminology like secure by design, right? So that's sort of a good segue into the first thing that I wanted to ask you is, is a lot of your time just sitting and analyzing infrastructure that already exists, or is it thinking about building, how to architect new solutions? Is a little bit of both? Like, what is your day-to-day?
It's kind of both. So I have a lot of infrastructure that I manage, and keeping an eye on this infrastructure and making sure it is up to date. We have CSPM software, Cloud Security Posture Management software, constantly running to make sure that that legacy system is active and is up to date and has no vulnerabilities on it. I'm also having to deal with new services that we're building and all new pipelines that we're building. And we're currently in the process of migrating everything to Terraform and being able to automate everything end to end. So it's kind of both looking at that old system and also maintaining the new, bringing in that new system and making sure that we've got the process in place, we're planning it out and making those changes happen.
Great. So what are some of the most, like the lowest hanging fruit, I guess, in this case would be the most easily tripped over blocks here that you see a lot at a time, in your own security analyses, right? Are they hardware? Are they hardware vulnerabilities? Are they just buggy code? Is there something with the network? What are the things that you're looking for?
It varies, to be honest. So for us, we don't have hardware, so we don't. Right. My department doesn't deal with that. But from a software perspective, we build all our code ourselves. We code in the open. We've got a public-facing GitHub. I can't say which department I work for. I'm not allowed to, unfortunately. But we do code in the open if you can find out. But we also have network components as well. Yeah, it's the most common gap we see is a mix of software. So we've had keys leaked online through our open coding a few times. That's quite a common one. It's also a mix of a human factor. The human factor is also quite a very common gap we see, and we have an entire team now dedicated to education and awareness of cybersecurity across our departments and slightly wider. In government, there is something called ALBs, partner orgs. These are people who are executive agencies that report to my department. And we have a team now going out to those people and educating them on cybersecurity, from phishing emails all the way through to secure by design practices and software development life cycles. We've got a whole host of things now doing on education and awareness. And it's kind of a mix of everything. I would probably say human factors, the bigger gap at the moment, but it can vary very widely each month.
It's funny how much of an emphasis there is on across the board in these on more secure default passwords, right? And obviously that's a consequence of things like the Mirai botnet and things like that, where it's easy to commandeer large numbers of devices very, very easily. But if most people had just changed the password, when they took it out of the box, then this wouldn't be as big of an issue. So. I do want to make sure that everybody gets an opportunity to ask Chris some questions. So feel free to either type them in or just cut me off. But one issue that's always really challenging from a security perspective that I'd like to get your take on is, so there's not a whole lot of commercial value in security, right? It's basically like insurance. So people aren't incentivized to spend a lot of time securing devices, and it's also directly counter to your efforts to get things to market quickly. So there have been a lot of awareness and education, but the fact is, if people don't want to do things, that's usually a big driver, unless you end up with a regulation that tells them that if you don't do this, you're going to get in trouble. What are some of the consequences of not complying, Chris, that you're aware of, if you can speak to those at all, and then from a UK perspective, and do you think those are enough to really drive IoT device security.
Before I start, I know Florian's got their hand up. Do you want to go first before I go in?
Go for it.
Yeah. So one thing, Brandon, you just mentioned. So there is no cost advantage in cybersecurity, or what exactly was your wording? So it was something like
you're not incentivized
yes.
security.
Yes. So I think it's a really good thing to compare it to quality as well. So you're also not really directly incentivized by having a really high quality product. So if you have a physical product built with high quality, and you really want to have good quality management and good quality assurance within your production, and that's something people are already aware of, and a lot of companies, they already do it. And there is also no direct incentive in high quality. And I think it's really similar to cybersecurity. And you should think of cybersecurity to really as like it's with quality. It's really important for you to have it, even if you don't really get incentivized right away.
That's an interesting point, because I've never actually thought about it like this, which is, if you go to Amazon, right, and you're like, here's the dollar Chinese version that you get 100 for $1, right? Or here's the $10 for one that you're like, okay, this toy car is going to last my kid for 10 years versus 10 minutes. You would make that trade-off really quickly. In the security sense, I don't think that people think about it like that, because it's not in most cases tangible, right? And even if you are compromised, at least from a consumer perspective, if you are compromised, you don't, in most cases, even recognize it. So, Amesh, do you what are your thoughts on this, sort of quality versus security, two different concepts?
So my point of view is basically on the cost side, okay? Because I always very cost sensitive. Being in India, you have to be very careful on that. So for me, I feel like if you have a bootloaders, if you have a hypervisors and all things to make it more secure, you have to spend more money to go for buying some of the security products to incorporate in your product, right? So it will be more secure, it will be high quality, but then the cost will increase. Now we have to see in the product front whether to comply this regulations, how the customer will react, right? So this will be another point for me to consider from the cost side. And then definitely, if you do not have the expertise in house, then it will take a little more time to develop those expertise and then deliver that product. So these are two fronts.
Zach, I think you were trying to raise your hand, and I'm one of these days we'll get you to figure out how to use this platform.
Wait, did I do that? My hand was my mistake. Hi everyone. Wait, what was the question again? So I have
right now what we're talking about is that the Florian brought up an interesting dichotomy between the quality of a device and the security of a device, and how the two are similar or different. And he wrote in the chat, it's difficult to measure the cost of quality or not having it. It's similar with cybersecurity. I don't know that I completely agree with the quality side. I think at companies like Congatec, I mean, you guys, those are some pretty measurable costs, right? We're going to use these components versus those components. We're going to we're developing to this standard for quality.
Yeah, but what I mean is, so if you just have a look at quality from a production side. So if you are within production, you are responsible for ensuring that there is a high quality. Then it's really hard to measure how much you really need to put in to ensure a constant level of high quality, because there are so many factors, and it's hard to say which factor has how much effect on the quality standards you want to keep. And it's hard to track down the cost for it, and it's even harder to track down the costs if there is any complaint or if there is anything. So if you had a reclamation and there was so you had an issue with quality, and then to measure how much it really cost you, that's really difficult. And the same with cybersecurity. And then not being able to track this cost makes it even more difficult to know how much you should invest in cybersecurity and also quality beforehand, because you can't really compare the costs of having quality to the costs you may have if you don't have quality. So that's what I wanted to say. I know it's a lot of quality, I said.
I mean, no, it's good. Chris,
I think Bing has a one-liner for this, but I think the balance comes from, you have to be paranoid enough to make it to tomorrow, but you also have not to be not too paranoid that you stymie yourself and stop all the, like you build everything around security and now you're not doing application development. So it becomes a balance of how much effort are you going to do to build in security and how much is effort really.
I think you're about to be told. That's the point. They're going to tell you exactly how much effort you're going to put in. So yeah, like I think that the big point here, like of today's session here, Chris, is what is that level, and what onus does that put it on somebody like Amesh or somebody like Zach or somebody like Ming who's developing a product, either like from a company ownership standpoint or from the engineering org or even from the individual engineer. You know, what is this going to mean for your day-to-day life? Because like I was saying earlier, since IoT became a thing, it was like, oh, well, we need to do secure by design. But the realities of economics are in opposition to that. So how are things going to change for people?
I think what the regulations are trying to kind of bring in is almost a change in the kind of the paradigm of thinking when it comes to developing. And the whole point of secure by design is it's done at the very start. It's the design is being implemented at point of inception, and it's slow at beginning, and it's completely understandable that it's going to take longer to plan things out. It's going to take longer to develop things, but ultimately, the end goal is that it's going to have a certain level of assurance to the public and a certain level of, again, quality to that product. And that's kind of the goal of that regulation, is to kind of force that shift in paradigm of thinking and moving away from those companies that just kind of spin out devices without ever thinking twice. That's how you end up with children's toys that are basically open microphones on the internet now, and being able to add in that kind of assurances to the customers that these products aren't going to do that.
And I know that like Florian, you guys put a lot of emphasis and thought in building things from the start, right? You know, this is very planned out and it's very methodical. Obviously, that's the case in every case. 1 second, Ming. The other thing that's interesting here is with a connected device, I think that we're not always necessarily sure what we're going to be adding to this in the future. That's kind of the point, right? In some cases. So what does secure by design actually even mean? Like, what does that mean to you, Chris, in the context of some of these regulations?
So for me, it's mostly about thinking about security from the get-go, essentially. What we do is before any development starts for us, we have a HLD, a high-level design of the system, both the data flow side as well as the architecture. And then we look at each point along it saying, okay, is point A to point B the right mechanism for sending data? Is it the right controls that are in place? It's all well and good having all these encryption standards in place, sending data from your IoT device to your server to then host it in an S3 bucket that's publicly available. You've got to know where all the touch points are for the data. And that's where kind of secure by design sits, is mapping out those touch points, mapping out that data flow, and being able to identify where security needs to sit. And it isn't a set standard. And these standards are essentially establishing a minimum level, but it's a risk-based decision for the most part. You've got the risk of moving data from point A to point B over plain text is acceptable in some circumstances. It's trying to understand what level of risk the IoT device poses, not only to your customer, but to your company, and then being able to tailor that security response to that risk. So, for example, as I said, like sending stuff over plain text is actually acceptable. The standard isn't changing that. If it is acceptable because the risk of what that data is has no meaning to it. If it's just system data that isn't actually relevant to the customer, isn't personal data, isn't actually relevant to the customer, it's just stats that are on the device, chances are there's probably no even need for encrypted, because if an attacker gets it, it means nothing. It's just statistics data that is device specific. But if you're sending medical data, then obviously that needs to be encrypted. And it's just establishing that risk, then doing the security by design from the get-go to that risk model that you've got ready for that device. It is slower development, yeah, at the start, but once it's kind of going, you've kind of got a pattern to follow. It's kind of repeatable almost to a degree.
And Ming, sorry, I'm just like guarding you off. It's like, and these regulations are essentially designed to try to figure out what that level of risk tolerance is. Is that a good way of describing it?
That's a great way of describing it. It is the minimum risk the government will accept for its public, essentially. And as long as this standard's being met, this is now the minimum standard, and that's what the regulation is setting out. It isn't. I mean, I think from the UK one, it isn't actually that this standard isn't fully encompassing. It is also got a risk level to sit base. It's got a risk level within it. So, like I said, with the medical data and statistic data being treated differently, that is accounted for in that Act, and you do need to have those different levels of security when it comes to that data, and it is all down to the risk and the user.
So now I'm just kidding, Ming. You can go. Get your hand up.
One of the things I was just going to talk about was going back to secure by design. It's actually going to be faster and easier if you're going to do secure by design at the beginning than try and retrofit it at the end. I know that when I was getting into some of my initial development, when I was getting into the whole security years back, and yet it was slow to start with. But nowadays, once you've got that mindset from the beginning of, even when I'm building just the initial proof of concept, I've got security in the back of my head, speeds up the whole process. So it's actually faster to have that little bit of time spent at the beginning than go, right, we've built this product, how do we now go about going and retrofitting security onto it?
And that's, I think, Florian's got an interesting comment here that sort of speaks to what you were just talking about. You do, yes, starting off, it's going to keep you, give you a sort of a roadmap, and it's a lot easier to start off with a plan than sort of like bolting it on and chasing the dragon afterwards. But, if you have this agile process, are you going to, this is what Florian says, basically, you need to define the intended use of your product. Based on that, you can then do a risk assessment of your product, and that's the basis for secure development. I think that's the same thing what Ming is essentially getting at, right? Like
that's absolutely the same thing. Yeah.
And so it's like, but so now again, if you are in like Ming, you've designed connected devices, IoT devices, right? Is the intended use case of that product always, 95+% defined, or is there wiggle room? I mean, sometimes it's difficult to see into the crystal ball, what you may do with it or what may be running on it.
Yeah, but there's quite a lot of things when you're doing that initial design, especially when you've got your hardware and the capabilities.
Yeah.
That you can plan in advance for, even though we're not doing this at the minute, because it can, let's make sure we're protected against it.
What about updates that include potentially new software components? We've been talking about Docker, in the past, and doing containerized delivery, and that is going to be that's going to be the way, right? For IoT devices, this is the way, not just in development, but also increasingly in deployment. And a lot of these requirements, and this is an interesting thing too, Chris, is are starting to say you're responsible for your supply chain, right? And not just what you're doing, but what's inside of your device. So Ming, it's maybe a little bit of a corner case, but what if you're deploying new software to your system, right? I mean, this starts getting a lot complex.
It does, but then that goes back to the chat we were having a few weeks back on your SBOM. Mm-hmm. So having your software bill of materials reduces that complexity because you know what's in the supply chain, even though this is new software. Because you've got all of the components documented, you therefore will be knowing for the complete traceability of this new bit of software.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this was that was the question that I was posing in the chat a little bit earlier to you around, is it possible to connect, OWASP or some of these vulnerability databases directly to an SBOM? And you said you weren't sure, but
not sure about OWASP. I mean, I know that, I'm going to bring Yocto into this. Within Yocto, we've got that whole thing of being able to automatically hook into the CVE database as part of the build system. Mm-hmm. Chris, you may know more about, are there tools that are doing automatic scanning that are hooking into the OWASP?
Yeah, there are multiple. There are some that we use. I think, Chekhov. No, maybe not Chekhov, but there are some that we have baked into our build pipelines, essentially, that run it against the code base and look for the signatures of vulnerabilities. We've also got it we have an entire GRC process that essentially, similar to what you're saying with SBOM, we identify all of our suppliers, and these are usually physical suppliers. And we identify what IT stacks they use, what risk they pose to us as a department. And there are entire databases for this. And we're currently bringing in threat intelligence tools as well that we're going to start running against our logs. So we get telemetry from our services. We want to run that telemetry through threat intelligence tools as well. So we're kind of going a bit beyond that kind of OWASP CVE detection database, but we need to do that. But
so
yeah,
is
that's
that kind of the equivalent of a static analysis, dynamic analysis of a live running system?
Yeah.
That's cool.
So we do the static analysis of code builds. So we've got things, I think it's Chekhov, I might be wrong there, but we have things baked into the pipeline that do that kind of initial scanning. They look for signatures, they look for code practices. And then we've also got the dynamic analysis with the actual application running. We look at what traffic is getting in, what IPs are coming from, what they're trying to do on the application to identify kind of abnormal behavior.
How much did that scale? I'm just thinking of, from our perspective of, we might have 1,000 devices out in the field.
I mean, it depends. It all depends on the device itself and the company and what they're wanting to what the end goal is. I mean, I'm probably talking way beyond the scope of a small business here. Obviously, I'm talking about a public department with, we bring in billions for the government, so we have quite a significant amount of budget for this stuff, but.
And that right there, this is the beginning. This is the other half. The one part is, okay, well, I don't want to do it because I'm lazy or I've got to get to market more quickly, whatever, right? But this is where regulation meets industry and then all hell breaks loose, right? Because it's, all right, so you're telling me that you want me to buy, essentially, you're not telling me, you're forcing me to buy these tools, which in certain cases, I mean, what's a license of LDRA or any of these like sort of advanced static analysis tools and dynamic analysis tools that I've got to have running all the time. You're adding costs directly to my bottom line. This impacts this. We were talking right before we got on about how this could impact the entire industries.
I mean, that's where a small company like myself, I can't afford those tools.
Yeah.
It absolutely does. I have nothing to do with the regulation side of things. I don't make any of this stuff. But Yeah, it does. At the end of the day, it does. And one of the things that these regulations also do is they do kind of drive people to look for alternatives. So currently, yes, there's a bit of a captured market in this area. Chances are someone's going to come up with an open source version of the services, and then the database is slowly going to start filtering down as well. These regulations do also drive out other kind of cheaper alternatives to these kind of products, because there is a captured market because no one else really needs it. By creating a regulation, you also now create the need for the tool, and thus people then start competing more in this space to kind of fill that need for that gap essentially that's forming.
Then we found out that the president of LDRA was related to an MP, right? Okay, yeah, I think I'm trying to balance this right now, because I do want to have a conversation about what this means as an owner, like as a Ming or as an Umesh, right? That was the plan next week, and see, it's hard to draw the line here, but I definitely think that this is a great discussion. I'm super glad that you're able to join us today, Chris. Do you have any like tools or resources or recommendations besides just secure by design that you would offer to the gang here?
Nothing's jumping off the top of my head at the moment, but
it's like just work for the government, have billions of dollars behind you, and you can afford it.
To be fair, it is down to that secure by design. It is all about thinking at the very beginning and trying to implement it at the very beginning. So I've mentioned the tool checkoff. I'm pretty sure that's an open source tool. It is about checking code bases. There are paid versions of it, I believe, as well. But also, it's kind of implementing those kind of low-level tools, checking at the very beginning when it is a small project before it is taken off into a colossal big product where you can't just bolt on security as an afterthought. And by implementing at the small stage, you kind of have assurances as you build up, as you get bigger. And that's kind of where the whole secure by design thought comes from, is you start it small, the security problems are small, you fix them small, and they don't become a massive overburdenous, almost tech debt, security debt almost, that forms. But in terms of tools, I don't have any that come to the top of my head. I can't think of any, but there definitely are out there, and there are definitely open source ones as well that are getting better by the day. I mean, for secret scanning, we've got TruffleHog in place. That's an open source free secret scanning tool. We've got that implemented pre-commit hook on our GitHub repos. So now, if someone accidentally submits their AWS credentials to our open source GitHub page, we should hopefully now catch it before it becomes public. Things like that. And that is, we're securing from the very beginning. We're securing at point of commit, and we're trying to push that as far left as we can with the security.
So I'm having the same conversation with Florian in the chat right now. He's got a bad connection, but how many people here are using agile, shift left development processes? Umesh, do you do that? Ming, do you do that in some of your work? Is everything modern and shifted left?
I was going to say, I thought most people used agile these days. It's almost the de facto method of, you're going to use agile, you're going to use Git.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How about you, Umesh? Are you guys shifted left?
Yeah. For some clients, yeah.
What do you mean for some clients?
Yeah, for the bigger clients where you need to have a sophisticated delivery processes, then yeah, because we also deal with very, very small projects, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there, the process itself doesn't add up, right? So some of very early stage prototype also we've been built. So yeah.
So if you're like Ming, I guess, and Chris, what are some, and you Florian, and from the chat room, when you're talking about just tips or best practices in your shifted left process, in your agile process, like do you have like check marks, like a couple things to really quickly consider? I mean, Ming, you brought up SBOMs. Are there ways that you can make sure that your development process is organized to potentially cut down on some of the potential risks from the beginning. I don't know, Chris, you already mentioned some of the tools. Anything else?
Yeah, I mean, we've got a whole IR process. We make it public to all of our developers that this is the process they're going to follow, and that way they're thinking about it from the start, and they're not going to just show up on the door saying, "Okay, we need a cyber stamp of approval now," or "We need to take the service live. We now need to do these acceptance criterias," and at least they know about it, they think about it, and then it's not being bolted on as an afterthought.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Ming?
I can say so much of it, I think, is down to the education of the team, of making them aware of the potential pitfalls before they step into them.
Mm-hmm.
So a bit of it comes from experience, a bit of it comes from actual education, but then the education comes from the experience, and the experience comes from making the mistake in the first place.
Right.
Which is why I've got lots of experience.
The experience comes from getting slapped with a fine or something. Is Chris, do you know, is that the prevailing penalty that's being threatened is fines right now, or is it like, are there layers? And then Florian, you two, are there steps up? Because I know that one of the consequences is can't sell here anymore.
With PSTI, I believe it is fines. It's not criminal. It's not criminal law at all. So there's no risk of jail or anything like that. It's more of just a fines. The regulators have a lot of steps in place to talk you through it, and essentially there's a lot of fail points before it hopefully gets to a fine, where you have to interact with the regulator behind that law. But I believe it is just fines, and then it followed up with like kind of, if it's a serious offense, I think product recall is also on the table with PSTI, but I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, man. I mean, this is I wonder, is this going to be like a GDPR thing where there's, you know, I don't want to say it this way, but a little bit of a witch hunt for, like you're saying, Ming, you know, some of these were created for mega corps, right? And then, you know, little guys get caught up in all of the trouble. Is this going to be like that, or do you think it's really going to be enforced strongly across the board? What's your perspective?
I'm not sure, to be honest. I don't know. The enforcement team behind that they will be looking at things, but I imagine they'll be only looking at kind of bigger companies to a degree to begin with, because they're the ones they expect the standard to be followed by. And then I don't think small companies will initially be looking at that kind of. The regulators won't necessarily be looking at those small companies to begin with, especially if you look at the ICO in the UK. They don't really look at like a garage, for example, or an automotive person, but they would then be more targeting kind of the big corporations. Like they issued a massive fine recently, I think, to British Airways, but they don't. I don't think they tend to go after the small businesses.
Yeah. Well, it seems. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, small business, at least we've got the advantage of we fly under the radar, that the regulators don't notice us until we get big, and then we get slapped by the fine.
Yeah, but I think that's the way we always think about it, but that's not the way that it usually plays out, right?
I live in France. There's going to be the regulatory bodies that are going to say, no, you cannot do anything.
Right. Like, just from my this is my perspective from across from the other side of the pond from GDPR, right? It was like, okay, well, we're going to nail Google and Amazon and all of these mega corps, right? And then all of those mega corps, sort of like with the tools thing, you know, they lawyer up, they put all these resources into making sure that they're compliant, but the people who are no longer compliant are you know, Ming's email delivery house, right? And so then Ming's email delivery house sends an email, and they need to make an example of somebody, so they nail Ming's email delivery house to the cross, and you know, all of a sudden it's like, man, this is not really what we intended these things to do in the first place. Is become a big pain in the ass for a bunch of companies making $200,000 a year or whatever, right?
I mean, for GDPR, I've never seen them implement a fine on a small business at this point. I've seen them issue warning letters, and I've seen them like talk to them. And they, to be fair with ICO, they're very good at kind of talking to people first and understanding things, and they do have a level of acceptance with their way they interact with small businesses. but I've never seen them actually issue a fine for a breach. So in the UK, we don't have EU GDPR. We've got a UK data protection law, which has a GDPR element to it, but they're very similar. But I've never seen them actually go after a small business before, unless they've done something really egregious to the point where it is hitting news headlines somewhere. And that's kind of thing as well, is if it's making the news, and it is if it's a device that's widely adopted as well by the public, then that tends to influence how far they're willing to go and how willing to look. But if you've only got a small customer base and it's a small business, you are probably going to get, as Ming said, fly under the radar.
Mm-hmm. Here's a question from Avery. Not sure if you saw this, Chris, but just starting out on my IoT development journey, the OTA updating aspect is a big unknown. I think for a lot of people, just getting started, OTA, even people who've been in it for a while, OTA is a big unknown. I'm worried about a bad actor hacking the OTA update process and serving an update. Is there any advice or resource on how to secure this process from the ground up?
It's mostly around signing packages and ensuring that your devices are essentially have a stored signatures as well as a way of verifying those signatures. Because at the end of the day, if someone can sign your package with your credentials, something's gone really wrong. And it's being able to set up that kind of update process with the signing process in place. I believe there are several standards in place for being able to sign packages in a cryptographically secure way with redundancy. And being able to do that with a IoT device is also quite important. I was involved in a paper that was released on the BBC where we broke a security system, CCTV cameras software, by exploiting that exact update process. We forged they had a hard-coded public signature on the device, but what they didn't anticipate was you can actually manipulate the file to match the signature, because they didn't do any verification on it. So we were able to sign the package as though it was from the OTA system, and then essentially break the device and get access to the CCTV system from root. So there are mechanisms, but it's all about that signing process and make sure it is verifiable.
Ming, what about you?
It is the same thing. It's making sure that everything is signed so that you've got the verifiable chain of trust that this particular package has come from a known, secure, authorized source. And I mean, that should be baked into any OTA system from the outset, which is why that is always recommend you don't build your own OTA system, because these are the little things that you keep on forgetting.
Exactly. And actually, to that point, I thought you were going to bring up Mender, Ming. I dropped Mender into the chat here.
Mender is actually, it's what I use out in the real world, and it's got all of these built straight into it.
Yeah, and Avery, if you're just starting, there's a trial version that's free for a year for 10 devices. Mender's an OTA update service.
Just doing a little bit of a pre-advertisement for them. Their core technology is actually open source. So if you're hosting it and you're just using the core technology, that is open. What you're paying for are the bells and whistles that, as a sysadmin, just make my life easier.
Yep. So check that out, Avery, and that might be some help for you, especially as you're sort of on-ramping and learning, right? Just lean on stuff so other people have done. Drew, I don't know what you're saying. MCU Manager doesn't a pretty job in that. Please clarify. How about you, Amesh? What's your OTA update recommendation?
My update recommendation for microcontroller projects, I would definitely go and get some products like yesterday, or Sean was talking about it, right? Some of the IR has some cool products for the security updates and all. So my recommendation is to go and get some good product and manage it from there. Like what Ming says is that's what I also feel like. We have some IoT devices build OTA feature, but then it's really pain, a lot of maintenance of it. So go and get some good product and get it done out of it.
Great. Zach, what about you? What are you? I know that you came from the mobile world, so you probably have all sorts of experience with OTA update systems or technologies.
I mean, in mobile world, we give security back to the app. Whoever's running the app store, they're the ones they're going to make sure that you're running the correct APK, and you can't even upload a malicious APK. Like if you're doing some stuff on Android and you want to upload something, they have scans for you before you can upload something, and obviously you have to list every. And I wonder if this is something that can be done in embedded, or maybe there's a solution already. Some sort of manifest that says, I'm going to use X, Y, Z, and D peripherals, and this is how I'm going to use them, and this is the permissions I'm going to need when using them. You already have to have all of this ready before you even start giving out your code and even giving out updates. So sort of OTA is kind of protected over that. However, there's ways around this. Like people can make APKs and download them through in rooted phones and such. So it's not a hard and fast rule on how to do this, I would say. But you need to be careful. Each step needs the context of that step so that you can make the right decision, which is the thing about security, because you can't just follow some guide you found. It depends on what data you're using, when you're using it, how you're using it, and all of that. I don't know if I went around the circle on that question.
No, I think you just summarized the whole. Go ahead.
So I think, Zach, you mean like the way we take the APK and use some jar signer and sign the APK and then deploy it into the App Store. And similarly in the firmware, we do the same thing, right? We
Yes,
get some M secure products from, XYZ company. I don't want to name the company's names, but you take somebody's XYZ product and then sign the firmware and then upload it there. So
yeah,
I feel like I did the same. I did these things for APK because I did worked on some of projects where I did APK for some clients. So I feel right now, seeing from the top, it looks the same for the embedded world and the front end world, like signing process.
that's cool.
So I know that this is you think that this was an easy answer, because if you ever ask developers or people in the technology industry, or any industry for that matter, what they think about regulation, it's like boo hiss, right? But do we think, we'll do lightning round here, do we think that this is required? There's another part about regulation where it's like, well, if we don't control this, the industry is going to destroy itself, right? So Ming, what do you think? We're just going to go lightning round. Do you think this is a good development or negative?
I think it's a necessary evil.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Chris, how about you? We won't tell your boss.
Exactly. Exactly. I think it's a necessary evil. I mean, at the end of the day, it's to protect the public because of the completely wild cards out there, things like the Morai botnet and stuff like that you mentioned. Like, that's what happens when it doesn't work. So it's establishing that minimum standard.
Yeah. Amesh, how about you?
Yeah, I agree that we have to do it, even if it's a painful. I again correlate this to the front end world. When the Google used to give a constant update for some NPA packages broken, I left that mobile development because I have to manage entire product, right? So from hardware to cloud to the application, and it was very painful. But over a period of time, let's say from 2016 to 2017, Google updates are mature now. The broken packages are not as much as what we have seen in the past. So I think it would be good for the security. So I think it makes sense to invest in it.
Great. Zach, what do you think?
Can you say the question again? I'm going to go on a rumble and I don't want to.
I'm gonna block you out, dude. You're about to get shut. You're going to get shut out. IoT or regulation in general, good thing or bad thing?
Good thing. It depends. We just need a community involvement in it. Yes, good thing. I think it's important that we all share how we are securing things, and we make standards that are usable by everyone and are open. So I don't see how regulation is a bad thing. However, it should be open enough that dissenting views are analyzed before they're shut down. That's it.
Wilson, you've been on here and we haven't. Thanks for joining, dude. Regulation for you and your company, especially around IoT devices and cybersecurity. Is this a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, I think it's a good thing when it's not too hard on the makers, right? That's one thing I feel. Although I'm not in the IoT field, I'm going to the power electronics field, so I rarely use or interface with IoT devices. But my colleagues, I have the sense that they have to be more or less like a middle ground. It should be balanced. If it's too hard, it becomes difficult. If the evolutions are too minimal, then it's going to be catastrophic. So yeah, that's one personal opinion about it.
Great. Okay, guys. Well, we hit the end of the hour, so I really appreciate everybody's time. I had to cheat here and put an update in, and now I'm going to impose a hard deadline on Zach. So I think one of the reasons that Zach has been partially in and partially out is because he's been working on the remote development platform that we've been talking about. Zach, can you give a quick update about that and let everybody know what that is again if they weren't present last time, and what you're working on? And then on next engineering or next office hour, you're going to show it to us, right? Working perfectly. Can't hear you. You're muted. You're muted.
I don't know about perfectly. I'm giving up on perfect. Okay, so here's the thing. We have everything working, but the flashing device was meant to be a Pi 0. But
what is it? What are you talking about?
Oh, so RTFES, we are making a remote testing solution where you can use hardware remotely. And the plan is to have people do 2 challenges in the next few days. The first challenge is going to be rendering graphics or video on 32 by 8 LED matrix. You can just figure it out. We'll connect it to an ST link for you, and you can do that. That's the first challenge that we hope to launch. And then the second challenge is to do this, get some fancy motion on this little arm that is on ESP32 power down. Okay, so that in itself is an easy problem. The issue with why these challenges are not live at the moment is because we've been developing this on basically sub-powered hardware. When we put everything together this morning, so that is the streaming of the video, the collecting the cron job that collects the binaries and writes them to the target device. Basically, the Pi 0 ran out of memory, and we could only hold the thing alive for like a few minutes, and then it would like reboot, and then we would have to restart servers and SD flash and all of that. So in 1 hour before 1 hour before engineering hour, when this office hour, when I was going to demo this, I had to run to the shop and get a Pi 5, which has 4 gigs of memory, and then start cobbling up together all the libraries that we are using. After I just got it working together, now I can use this Pi 5 and probe into this ST. So we can send firmware from the 5 to the ST, and I can see camera view out of that. So what I'm going to do after office hours right now is work with Bernard, and we get it working with the website again and get the script working. And then somewhere tonight, I think Ashraful, I don't know if he's here, Ashraful and Marvin and Melta are going to be the first ones to try and send code over the air to this device. It should be working. There's already there's an endpoint where you can see this. It's just that the video is not hooked up to this camera yet, but it should be done in a couple of hours. I was really hoping to present it at this office hours, but life decided deadlines. That's really it. Demo gods decided that I was not going to demo it today. Yeah, that's the update for sure.
Cool. Thanks. So yeah, just the abbreviated version is, guys, basically we're making, and it's relevant here, we're making essentially an OTA updates sort of solution where you have a remote, a piece of a kit essentially that's going to be at Zach's place, and we'll all be able to remote into it and flash it. So we'll build on that over time. But yeah, maybe there's some opportunity for us to consider some of the things we talked about here today in that. Chris, hey, dude, honestly, thank you so much for joining. Really appreciate the insight and the perspective, and would love for you to come by and continue to give your thoughts and opinions on different things. And as always, if you're technical and are in the industry and have experience and knowledge to share, that's always welcome here. And then Florian, you too, man, same thing. Thanks a lot for giving your take on what's happening on the EU cyber resiliency side. That's these two things are going to impact a lot of people, because in tandem with what's happening in the US, these are many, maybe half, a huge percentage of the world GDP, right? So if you're shipping into these sectors, you're going to need to know about these things. Next week, the same time, same place, we're going to have this discussion that dives a little bit further into IoT OEMs and surviving some of this legislation and these regulations. And I'm going to try and look. There's a guy, Ralph Moore, that I know who's from Microdigital. I'm going to try and look a little bit at like costs here. We touched on that a bit, and what this looks like in real life, in the real world, for a real company. So thank you so much. If you have not joined the DevHeads community, you can do so here. It is discord.gg/DevHeads, or you can head over to the website, which is now up. A couple of things still being fixed on it, but it's at devheads.io. And you can find out all the things that everybody's talking about, things that people need help with, things that you need help with. You can post them there, and questions like Avery's and others, we'd love to have them. So appreciate the time. Sorry I allowed us to go a little bit over today, but it was a good conversation. So if there's nothing else, I guess we'll see you guys in the server.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks all.
Have a good weekend. See you guys.
Bye all.